This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right. What's going on, everybody? It's another Friday. Another week of classic wrestling coverage here on the FSWR channel. It's also another one of those shows where I just sat down and started recording without thinking of anything clever to start with. Sometimes I can think of stuff off the cuff, but I don't really have anything to report on in my personal life. I did pull into my apartment this evening only to find that one of the buildings adjacent to me is having its roof replaced. And I can only hope to God that doesn't end up transpiring over here too, because that does not sound like a fun time. Having to listen to drills and hammers and loud noises. I presume a lot of that work is happening during the daytime when I'm not around. So, if they're done by 6 o'clock, they won't have an issue for me. But you are tuning into the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling channel nobody knows but everybody needs. I think you all know the normal intro by now if you've been following the channel. Subscribe, comment, give the show a like. Check us out on Mondays and Fridays for classic wrestling talk and some WWE coverage whenever we talk about the PLEs. As I mentioned Monday, I know WWE's got a Saturday night's main event this coming weekend. Originally, I did not plan to cover it, but I think I'll actually have some spare time on Saturday to pre-plan, so I can make some room in the early evening to watch that. I also just remember that Monday is Memorial Day, so I'm probably not going to be working, which is good. So I'll have an extra day to watch some of the territory footage for the next Friday show. I think I finally settled on a formula that works for me in terms of preparation. It used to be me trying to cram in watching everything during the week and then doing a long recording session on Thursday. But, that's when I was working my other job and I actually had a little more free time. Now it's a different story, so I try to knock out everything over the weekend so I can spread the recordings out over a few days. Because I just don't have the voice to be able to record for 2 straight hours. I'm not built for radio. But I am built to talk about wrestling, so what do you say we get into it? Starting with this TBS Superstation show with NWA. And it's tournament week, baby. Time to crown ourselves some new World Tag Team Champions. I say that with the utmost enthusiasm. Like it's a major groundbreaking tournament that anybody actually remembers. Well, according to our good pal Jim Hurd, it was a tournament comprised of the 8 best tag teams on the planet. Meanwhile, last week when we actually ran down the list of teams, half of them were tag teams that were just randomly thrown together. Now, we'll talk about that later on in the program. The other big item of business, actually, it wasn't even anything to report on for this week. We were told that JR would be traveling to Charlotte to visit Ric Flair's doctor in order to get an update on the timetable of his recovery. But that'll be a news update that we won't hear about until next show. So what did that leave us to talk about with this week's 45-minute program? Well, we got to see Sting defend the TV title against Jack Victory. Oh, I'm sorry. Secret Service agent Jack Victory. Because, yeah, that's still a thing. Didn't they already announce the other week that Victory was now a member of the New Zealand militia? Why is he still pretending to be Paulie's muscle? Whatever. Match didn't go very long. Sting went over with a crossbody dive from the top. We did hear in this segment that the Great Muta has officially challenged Sting to a World Television title match. Gary Hart was out there momentarily to hype that feud. Still no word on what exactly the Dragon Shy challenge stipulation is all about. That was apparently Muta's match of choice. No, don't ask me to sit here and remember offhand what that gimmick was supposed to be. I haven't got the first clue. Although Gary Hart did tell us in his promo to Sting, when you and the Great Muta step into the Dragon Shy challenge, it's going to be different. Different, you say. Was that Gary's way of simply saying, I don't know what the fucking stipulation is going to be about either, so here's me trying to sell it like it's something people should be interested in? Well, I'll tell you what, different is certainly a way to sell it. Could be good, could be bad. Who knows? But he's going to make Sting wait regardless. He'll get the Great Muta when the time is right. Only Gary Hart can make that kind of dialect work. When the time is right. Ridiculous. It's like he's talking about a woman's heat cycle. Anyway, we came back for an Eddie Gilbert promo, and he was more or less moral support for the Rick Steiner video they aired. It's interesting that right in the middle of them doing a storyline where Flair's supposed to be outselling his neck, they're talking about getting in touch with his doctor over the next several days to get an injury update. Meanwhile, a week prior, we're basically getting the exact same thing with Rick Steiner. Now, I'm assuming that he had a legitimate bicep tear because, they even showed us some of the atrophy that had built up under his arm when they played the clip here from his doctor's office. And let me just say this up front, before we break down anything they showed in this video, only Rick fucking Steiner could make a segment like this entertaining. I mean, you got Rick's doctor doing the most boring, monotone, dry explanation of how Rick tore his bicep, and he's showing us all these procedures he goes through in order to get his patients back up and fully recovered. In this case, he showed us a procedure called electromuscle stimulation, which basically involves him wrapping a giant bandage around Rick's arm and then using a device to shock him. It's not electroshock therapy in the traditional sense, but kind of in that same vein. And of course, Rick is super stoked about it. He's all giddy and excited. At one point, the doc showed us a bottle of cream that he applies after the electrostimulation part, which Rick grabs and starts shaking. And it's like perfect comedic timing as the doc snatches it out of Rick's hand while he's trying to act all calm. But you can tell he's totally fed up with Rick here. Again, only Rick Steiner can make something like this humorous. Like, we're all supposed to be sympathetic to his situation. Meanwhile, Rick's just having fun. Laying back in his chair, all happy to get his arm stimulated. Hey, Scotty, look at my arm. But we were basically told he'd be back in the ring by early June. Or thereabouts. And that took us back to the ring for Scott Steiner versus Tom Branch. Scotty, who is now an honorary member of the First Family, and being accompanied to the ring by Missy Hyatt, which is obviously significant for storyline reasons at a later date. Although it doesn't alleviate the awkwardness when you consider that Eddie and Missy are still involved here, and well, this was right around the time they got divorced. Anyway, Scott won with a belly-to-belly in like 20 seconds. And then right as Kevin Sullivan tried to hit the ring, Eddie ran out with a chair and stopped him. And then it was immediately, let's pitch to our first vignette of Flyin Brian Pillman, which had some of the worst canned retro 80s pop music I think I've ever heard. God. I can't even call it reasonably good mall music. It was just bad. Something I'd expect to hear in a Richard Simmons workout commercial. And ironically enough, that's what 90% of the video was Brian Pillman working out in the gym. And man, there's so much to talk about when it comes to Brian. A lot of ups, a lot of downs. You know, most of those downs coming at the expense of the latter part of his career. You know, the unceremonious way he left WCW in '96 after the fallout with Kevin Sullivan. You know, the Hummer accident a couple months later, right before he'd signed with the WWF. You know, never really getting a chance to meet his fullest potential for the short time he worked in the WWF before he died. It's such a tragic story. I don't even remember when they put out the Dark Side documentary on him. It was a while ago. Was that in 2021? I know it was like one of the first seasons. And I was obviously a big Brian Pillman fan growing up. I never watched any of his stuff in Calgary, unfortunately. But from the time he came in WCW in '89, basically up through his final run in the WWF in '96, '97, you know, I got to see pretty much every side of Brian Pillman. Whether he was a high-flying, charismatic babyface or the loose cannon, off-the-cuff, batshit crazy heel. And his promos, my God, his fucking promos were next level. He really was one of those dudes that, had things gone differently, you remove the car accident that effectively killed his in-ring career, I still think he would have been a huge star in the WWF. Maybe not the WWF champion. I don't know if Vince would have gone all the way with booking Pillman on top. But he definitely would have been somebody that they could have programmed to work with one of the top babyfaces or the top champion at the time. You know, just like picture the Brian Pillman Steve Austin feud from '96, but done a couple years later after Austin had been fully established as the top face of the company. That's where I think Pillman could have gone. And I know his son's kind of taken a different approach since he started working for the WWE. I forget what Pillman Jr.'s calling himself now. Some stupid, goofy NXT name. Lexus King. Something like that. I mean, the whole idea is that he doesn't want to be perceived as living in his dad's shadow. He wants to make it big on his own, and while yes, that's commendable, I don't see Lexus King as a future world champion in WWE. Whereas if he actually followed in his dad's footsteps and did something along the same lines as what Cody did when he came back to the WWE, that's a path trajectory where I could see WWE wanting to try to ride that wave of momentum. Like, yeah, Brian Pillman couldn't live up to his fullest potential in the WWE, but Pillman Jr. sure can. He can win the world title for his daddy and carry on the legacy of the family. If they wanted to go that route. Not saying they will. And I don't want to try and make the whole conversation about Pillman Jr. I'm happy he's found his place in the WWE. I'm not all that optimistic about him choosing to actively dismiss his family lineage. It seems very odd. But yeah, definitely looking forward to talking about Pillman in WCW. One of the very few bright spots in the summer of '89. So that brought us back to the ring for a fun little match. It's Terry Funk going up against a debuting Eddie Guerrero. Back before Eddie had officially signed a WCW deal in, I think it was '95. And right after he had wrapped up with Paul Heyman in ECW. I don't know if there's any significance to Eddie being brought in to wrestle Funk here specifically in '89. They were both Texas natives. I'm sure Funk had watched a handful of Eddie's matches from the work he was doing in places like AAA or CMLL during the time. But I might be grasping at straws too. I think we actually saw Eddie a handful of times in the early '90s. But he still wasn't under a contract by that point. Of course, it's Eddie, so even though the match is intended to be a regular TV squash, it's one of those unintentional showcase matches to spotlight Eddie and kind of give the American market a little taste of what he could do. And yeah, he was still green if you want to get overly technical. There were a couple what the fuck spots that Eddie tried here where I think he was getting a little too creative with the lucha offense. Points for style, though. I think my favorite was when he tried to do a springboard leap off the top rope to land on his feet. But the whole thing happened so sluggishly, you'd have thought it was being shown at half speed. We also had Funk deliberately throwing Eddie over the top rope to the floor right in front of Byron Scott. And it did not lead to a disqualification. Despite JR saying it should have been one. And so marks the period in WCW where the over-the-top roll came and went. Trust me, it was a lot worse during the Nitro era. Like every week someone was getting tossed over the top rope, and it led to this ongoing controversy for months where nobody could figure out what the rules were. Is it a DQ? Is it not? Who knows? More importantly, who cares? So I think eventually they just quietly dropped it one week and never mentioned it again. So Funk gave Eddie a pile driver on the floor, and he subsequently threw him back in the ring to pin him. And then we had a very heated confrontation between Funk and a few fans in the aisleway, which could have been really bad if the referees didn't pull him back. Trust me, I saw the look on some of those fans' faces. They looked like they were getting ready to throw down. And not in a worked manner. Good match, though. I won't give Funk a hard time for not being able to execute the big swing spot. I could, but I won't go there. His promo after the break was too good for me to criticize Funk's ring ability. I think this was one of those promos where Funk was just looking for an excuse to say the word ass on TV. So he disguised it by referencing a jackass, which actually took me a minute to realize what he was even talking about. The fact that he was referencing the breed of animal and not an actual person. But he went into this diatribe about how his dad shot one of the gimp jackasses on his farm when he was a kid growing up. And it broke his heart at the time. But he also came to understand why his dad killed it. It was useless and no longer a contributing factor to society. They put it out to pasture just like how everyone needs to put Ric Flair out to pasture. Because he is also now a useless, gimped jackass. I just found it funny how many times Funk said the word jackass here. It was at least a dozen times. Maybe more. He also got down on his knees and begged for Jim Ross to consider him the greatest wrestler alive today, which JR did not. He actually didn't react at all. I would have put him over. Pay me to be an unbiased commentator. Not when Funk's involved. He's too entertaining. We then had Lee Scott and the Enforcer taking on Ron Simmons and Ranger Ross. Remember when we were talking about the tournament consisting of the alleged 8 best tag teams in the NWA? Well, here's one of your top 8. Ranger Ross and Ron Simmons. Comical. You know what I think this was? I think it was an excuse to keep Ranger Ross out of the ring for as long as humanly possible. Let Ron do all the work. Ross, in my recollection, did like 2 things in this match. A body slam and a shitty super kick where he tripped over his own foot. Meanwhile, Ron did the bulk of the work here and ended up getting the win with a flying shoulder block. They are wrestling the SST next week. So I presume this is a way of getting them some TV exposure before they evidently get fed to Samu and Fatu. And then they immediately go from that to this absolutely preposterous Dynamic Dudes pre-tape. And I do mean preposterous. Never in a million years did I think I would ever be sitting here talking about Johnny fucking Ace doing aerobics. But nevertheless, here we are. Dude. I can't even begin to describe this fucking video package. It was hysterically bad. but not even hysterical in the sense where you could actively laugh at it. It was... I am so thankful I'm alone in my apartment watching this right now, because if I had a girlfriend walk in the room in the middle of this, it's over. Immediately. She would have walked out that front door and would have never thought twice to look back. And I wouldn't have blamed her. That's how embarrassing this was. It was that, plus the combination of this goofy doo-wop music they were playing. That was the turnoff right there. It wasn't even Johnny and Shane doing calisthenics with a bunch of single moms in the gym. It was that fucking garbage music. They picked that. Somebody put this video package together and said, "That sounds great. Let's use that." Did I ever mention how terrible this gimmick was? I might have. Yeah, it was no good. Nothing against Shane Douglas. Johnny Ace can go piss up a rope sideways. But honestly, it doesn't matter who they would have put in this role. Nobody could have made this work. Like, who the hell's going to come out to the ring with skateboards and make it look cool? Nobody. Not Shane Douglas. Not John Laryngitis. Not Darby Allin. Just bad times all around. But that finally brought us to the first round of the tag tournament. It's the Road Warriors taking on the Fabulous Freebirds. The very first thing I wrote down in this segment, it is almost mind-boggling to think that they've butchered the booking of the Road Warriors so badly in the last year. Yet they're still over like motherfuckers. I can't believe it. It's astonishing. Even in an absolute going through the motions Hawk and Animal match, the people cheered these two like crazy. Oh, and believe you me, this was absolutely a 50% effort from the Legion of Doom. They knew they weren't going over here and said, "Fuck this. We are not putting in any more effort than necessary." And that's a shame, you know, because I like both of these teams. They're obviously legendary tag teams by their own right. But objectively, the match kind of sucked. Gordy was the workhorse here, but he was only in the ring for maybe half the time, if that. My favorite part in this match was right during Hawk's comeback, where you could see Michael Hayes extending his hand outward so Hawk could grab him and shoot him off. Didn't even try to mask it. Just openly put his hand out and said, "Here you go, bud. Shoot me off." So it broke down into a four-way. And then in one of the dumbest finishes I think I've ever seen in my entire life. And trust me, I've seen my handful of rotten-ass finishes. Here's what happens. The Samoans hit the ring, and they begin attacking the Road Warriors. This happens right in plain view of Nick Patrick, who, instead of disqualifying the Freebirds and awarding the match to the Road Warriors, because, well, you know, that would be the logical booking call in this scenario. No. Instead, this fucking airhead begins to Count the Road Warriors out. Let me repeat that. He counted the Road Warriors out. Even though they were the ones that were blatantly being blindsided and attacked. Even though everybody could see that Hawk and Animal were being targeted right from the onset. Nick Patrick gave the match to the Freebirds because Hawk and Animal couldn't beat the count. They were being beat up. Were we supposed to believe that the idiot babyfaces decided to actively pursue the Samoans? Because that is not what happened here. They were yanked out of the ring by force. Nick Patrick watched this happen. He saw it with his own two eyes. Yet he proceeded to punish the two poor babyfaces by fucking them over and disqualifying them from the tournament. You know, I've heard stories about Hawk and Animal being very disgruntled at the tail end of their WCW run. That they kind of phoned it in. You think they're justified? Because I'm watching the way they've been booked here under the Jim Herd regime. It fucking blows. They have been made to look like absolute dolts. Seriously, they can't win a match to save their lives. They're constantly being fucked around by dirty referees. Like, am I just supposed to forget about that 3-year period where these two were the most unstoppable force that couldn't be taken off their feet? When they ran roughshod through the entire tag division and beat everybody up? That apparently just never happened. They are now losers. So yeah, that finish sucked cock. Great start to the tournament. I now have high hopes for the remaining rounds based off of that booking call alone. Christ on a cracker. Is this shit seriously that hard? Who the fuck came up with that finish? Should be fired. So then we came back for a Teddy Long promo. I'll once again spare you the rant about him still being on television despite being fired in storyline. I think they just totally dropped that whole thing. Because they're not even mentioning it anymore. Anyway, he put over Terry Funk. Then he had JR pitch to a Norman the Lunatic pre-tape. It was actually the same one they aired last week. I encourage you to go listen to last week's report if you want my extended thoughts on Mike Shaw, aka Norman the Lunatic, and his many other tragically awful gimmicks. So, well, that was that. It was no good experiencing it the second time, I can assure you. And then we went to the ring for Hacksaw Butch Reed versus Cougar Jay. The highlight of this was watching Reed dump Jay out to the floor. Cougar Jay was actually taking some great bumps for it. He basically threw himself out and landed like how the Mulkeys used to take bumps in the concrete at the old studio. Not saying it was smart, but at least it was padded. But yeah, Reed beat him down for a few minutes and then won with a flying shoulder block. That was it. Total time filler. You know, I mentioned the other week that I'm really glad these shows are only an hour long right now. That is becoming more and more accurate as the weeks go by. Because, man, these shows are rotten. 40 minutes of dreck. And that's me actually including the Terry Funk Eddie Guerrero match, which was actually good. But you know, at the same time, we've been kind of pre-planning for this period because it was rough. WCW in the spring of '89 was not good. Kind of picked up over the summer, but hit and miss. I mean, things didn't really turn around for the company until the fall. And then it immediately went back in the shitter after Flair quit the booking team after like 6 months. So yeah, I'm obviously well aware of what's coming in the timeline. It doesn't make the shows any easier to watch or review. And speaking of things that never get easier to watch, Joel Watts on commentary. I know, I went there, but it had to be said. You know, especially when you have Boyd Pierce actively telling us, the viewers at home, this kid right here has a bright future. So make sure you cheer him and support him no matter what he says or does. Dude, I heard that from Boyd at the top of the show this week, and I was like, what the fuck? Could you attempt to be any more soliciting? It's like he had to try to convince himself in addition to everybody to go against what they already knew about Joel. The fact that he sucked and looked absolutely petrified to be put in that position. And I got Boyd out there basically shaming the people if they try to form any other kind of opinion. Look, Midsouth in '84 was a great time to be a wrestling fan. Doesn't mean that there weren't bad moments. And Joel Watts being put on color was a very, very bad business move. He just was not fit for that position. He knew it. We knew it. I think instinctually even Bill Watts knew it, even if he never admitted it aloud. I just got so irritated hearing boys shame talk me like that. It just insults your intelligence in a way that generates disgust heat. Like, we all know better. Don't fuck around with us like that. Joel was terrible. Should have never been put in that broadcast booth. By the way, he never actually said anything during that whole Boyd tirade. He just sat there with moot face. Anyway, let's get on with the show. We went to the ring for our first big segment of this week's program. It is the official contract signing between the Midnight and the Rock and Roll Express for the upcoming tag team title rematch. The matchup will be taking place on next week's program. Part of the stipulation for this contract is that it's essentially a title versus bounty match. It's the Rock and Roll's tag belts versus Jim Cornette's $50,000 reward. If the Rock and Roll win the match next week, well, they keep the belts and win the money. So as we pitch to the ring to get the official paperwork in order, Grizzly's there to run down the stipulation for everyone. Like, the entire time he's in there talking, I'm just totally fixated on the fact that he dwarfs everybody in the ring. Looked like Andre the Giant standing next to 6 Rey Mysterios, if you include Jim Ross. All in all, it's a very low-key contract signing. There wasn't a big brawl angle that took place at the end. No, they all just signed the contract, and that was pretty much it. Corny did the quick heat promo on him and promised that the Midnights would win their belts back. And Ricky vowed that they would be $50,000 richer by the end of next week. There was a moment right before Jim signed where he went, "I don't sign anything before reading it first." At which point he immediately started signing the documents without reading them. Well, in his defense, it's a 40-minute program. We don't have 2 hours to go over the fine print with a comb. Kind of an underwhelming segment if you were expecting the heels to jump the babyfaces or something. Yeah, don't worry, there's a much bigger angle coming up between the Midnights and the Fantastics that blows this contract signing out of the water. But we'll talk about that later on in the year when Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers show up. So after they plugged the Rock and Roll Win a Day thing one last time, we came back for our first TV match of the week. And what a TV match it was. One name that I had totally forgotten about in Midsouth was the name Mark Reagan. I know for a lot of fans that didn't watch Midsouth growing up, that name probably doesn't even register. I remember watching Midsouth tapes for the first time in '84 and seeing this guy pop up for a short period. Like the minute he debuted, I immediately wrote him off and was like, fuck. Yeah, this guy ain't gonna get over. And sure enough, the prophecy came true. Hey, let's take a young, good-looking black babyface and give him a Cajun dancing gimmick. That'll get him over like a wet fart in church. I'm not even poking fun at the stereotype of the black dancing babyface. It was just a flat-out dumb gimmick. Literally, that was the only appeal about him. He could shake his ass and do a reasonably good breakdance. So, well, he danced for about 5 minutes after he got to the ring. They finally rang the bell to start the match after Jerry Gray blindsided him. They do like 3 spots. And then Mark Reagan came out of the corner with a flying crossbody and pinned him. Yeah, not kidding. That was the whole segment. He danced, he strutted, he posed, did a couple wrestling spots, then he won with a lame finish. I think I'm starting to remember why Mark Reagan kind of escaped my memory over time. The gimmick was lousy, so I just kind of blocked it out entirely. So then we came back for the Rock and Roll Express versus Buddy Landel and Masayo Ito. I'm still miffed that they're using Buddy in this position. Still prefer seeing him team with Butch Reed. But I think I ranted about that the other week. The work was good here. I don't have anything to really say about the action itself. I did laugh at the finish when Ricky and Robert hit the double dropkick on Masayo. And you can clearly tell as they went for the pin that Masayo had kicked out well before the 3. But Pee Wee Anderson counted him down anyway. I don't know if Masayo just didn't realize that was supposed to be the Rock and Roll's finish, or if he went into business for himself. But it was funny because he kicks out, and then he immediately jumps up and was like, "What the hell? I kicked out. Yeah. You kicked out of their finish, dude. Way to go. So they were pretty much in and out with that portion of the segment. And then right as Boyd tried to pitch to break, we get a false break. Because out come Mr. Wrestling and Wrestling 2 to challenge the Rock and Roll to an impromptu title match. And this part was really bizarre. The heels make an open challenge to the babyfaces, but then the babyfaces come back down to the ring to tell the heels, we just wrestled a match. We're leaving. So, fuck you. And I'm sitting there like, huh. Well, that's a bit odd. The babyfaces just backed away from a heel challenge. Like, regardless of how you want to look at it, they just wrestled a match. They don't have to answer the open challenge if they don't want to. They wrestled a 3-minute TV match with 2 underneath guys. It's not like they just went 20-minute Broadway with the Midnight Express. So then the heels pulled out Ricky and Robert's ring jackets that they stole and basically tore them up in front of them. Then the babyfaces chased them off. Yeah, that was a very unorthodox way of presenting the babyface champions. I like how we're also supposed to give a shit about them having their ring jackets torn up, despite the fact that they come out like every week with a different color jacket on. It's like, you know, they can just have new ones made. It's not that big a deal. They're not poor. So then we get Magnum TA versus Hercules, after Mr. Wrestling had once again vented his frustrations about the Rock and Roll ducking them for a title match. I mean, at this point, he's basically the boy who cried wolf. You know, he's constantly bitching and moaning that the babyface champions are ducking him and Hercules and refusing to give him a title match. Yet every time they get their opportunity to fight Ricky and Robert, they end up backing down. Meanwhile, he's trying to justify, like, we're not fighting the Rock and Roll unless we get a prize. We can beat them anytime. We just want the belts. So Magnum and Hercules, other than the incredibly long, boring bear hug sequence, the match was fine. Magnum ended up catching Hercules with a belly-to-belly at the very end, which then led to Mr. Wrestling running a distraction on the apron so Hercules could pull out a gimmick to load onto his knee, and then hit Magnum with it for the DQ. Looking back, I'm not even sure what the gimmick was supposed to be. It just looked like a giant piece of athletic tape, but there was nothing attached to it. But of course, it set up the heat attack on Magnum until the Rock and Roll ran out to make the save. This is where I wrote, this week's show is basically a Rock and Roll Express showcase. 4 segments in, 3 of them have involved the Rock and Roll in some way, shape, or form. They're just plastered all over this show. I mean, let's be honest. With the way things are right now, there's one incredibly hot act in this company, and you're looking at them. This episode may as well have been titled Midsouth Television, the Rock and Roll Edition. There's that and everything currently going on with Dr. Death and the Russians. Now, last week, Dr. Death stole Crusher Khrushchev's TV title medal, and he's now wearing it to the ring despite the fact that he's not the current TV champion. I'm still not incredibly sure how this makes Steve Williams a babyface. The fact that he stole another guy's championship and is now trying to claim that he's the rightful champion without actually winning it. It's kind of a dick move. regardless, he's still being cheered because he's feuding with the Russians. So Dr. Death and Nikolai Volkov wrestled a short match this week. At some point during this, I made a comment about how fucked up the ring mat was. It didn't appear to be messed up at any other previous segment, but you could really see it here. The mat had basically folded up on itself and started crinkling all over the place. And I know these guys are larger athletes, so probably didn't help the situation any. But the mat was really screwed up for this match. Like, I was starting to think, is there a loose bolt under the ring or something? Because I'm kind of getting concerned about these guys. I don't know if they should be taking bumps on it. But they got through it. There was a spot where Nikolai went up for a pair of somersaults, which I thought was kind of neat. You know, I'd expect to see that out of a 300-plus pound heavyweight, just hitting the ropes and coming back with a frontward moonsault, or a somersault. But Steve avoided the second one. It ended with Steve picking up Nikolai for the Oklahoma Stampede to get the 3. I mean, they're clearly setting up Williams to get an actual title shot with Khrushchev soon. So him beating Nikita here made sense. Or Nikolai, not Nikita. Christ. I'm having a lot of brain farts. But yeah, good segment. Still doesn't explain how he's getting away with carrying around Khrushchev's TV title, but I'm going to try not to overthink it much. We had Terry Taylor versus The Shadow. And I think I figured out what the deal is with The Shadow. The answer is they just needed another generic heel under a mask to do jobs. Remember last week when he wrestled Magnum TA? And I was trying to come up with all these theories about who The Shadow was in Midsouth. You know, trying to make it seem like it was this elaborate story since I had like no memory of this gimmick ever happening. No, I think it's as simple as they needed somebody to put over baby faces. But not just any run-of-the-mill local job guy. They wanted somebody with a mysterious undertone. A masked man from parts unknown that we don't know anything about. Well, based on what we've seen of him in the last 2 weeks, here's what we do know. He's very short. He's very old. He can work to a degree. His stuff looks reasonably okay. That is literally what I've come up with. I don't think there's anything to it beyond that. They found a guy. They gave him a mask. They said, go, put over some guys. I mean, Taylor worked a decent match with him. There was a bit of heat on Taylor before he made his comeback and won with a flying forearm. I don't really have anything else to note about it other than that, which is sadly a lot of what I've been thinking about Mid-South television over the last month. There's just not a whole lot to say with these shows right now. They're very boring and one-dimensional. Like, man, even the TV main event with Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Crusher Khrushchev was very nondescript. I'm still having to remind myself that Duggan doesn't have any facial hair right now. Not since the Russian shaved his beard several weeks ago. I mean, he's out there with a totally clean-shaven look now, and it's weird. Especially because anything I've ever seen of Hacksaw Duggan throughout his career, like 98% of it was when he had some type of beard. And while this did have some classic Mid-South booking elements to it, By this point in the show, I was kind of over it. He and Khrushchev had a match. There was a spot where Duggan went after Khrushchev's knee. They were pretty steadily back and forth through most of it until Duggan hit the spear on Khrushchev, which then set up a very awkward pinfall spot where Duggan had to wait like 20 seconds for Volkov to hit the ring. So when Duggan went to cover Khrushchev, he actually had to pull himself off voluntarily to avoid accidentally pinning him. He easily could have won, but it was not in the plans. So it's the Russians and Hacksaw Reed attacking Duggan after the bell. And again, the timing of this just seemed really off. You get the heels attempting to pin Duggan down while they're covering his head with shaving cream and trying to go after him with scissors. But it's taken them like a goddamn hour to even tease the idea that they're going to cut his hair. Because obviously that's not going to happen. I mean, they're not cutting Duggan's hair on a random TV heat angle. So they have to wait forever for the babyfaces to run out to stop the attack. Oh, and guess who was a part of it? The Rock and Roll Express. What is that, segment number 5? 6? And of course, Duggan throws up the thumbs up to let everybody know that the hair is still intact. Even though the bad guys could have easily cut it moments prior. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, did I mention they replayed the Rock and Roll Win a Date contest video before the show went off air? I screamed. I said, I'm so done hearing about this fucking stupid Rock and Roll Win a Date contest. I don't ever want to hear it mentioned or plugged on television ever again. I'm done with it. It has now generated go-away heat with me. Yeah, I think we just need to call a spade a spade. This show has sucked for the last month. Sucked. This entire window from late April through May of '84, I don't remember it being this dull, but fuck, these shows are hard to sit through. It's like I'm rewatching the fall of '83 all over again. There's just no substance to anything on the program right now. The booking is very generic and lame. The shows are just nah. I don't know what's going on right now, but not really blown away with Midsouth right now. And I don't ever remember having that thought during any period in '84. But I guess my cynical, jaded nature is catching up with me again. Even the glory period of Mid-South. We're definitely running into some roadblocks. You know, it's like 1 minute they were doing all this crazy hotshot booking with all the top stars. Every segment was a must-see segment. There was something to talk about with virtually everything, and bam. Like a brick wall, we've just hit this lull. It's a plateau. And I know there's still a lot of good stuff forthcoming, but yeah, right now, Mid-South is just not doing much for me. Well, we're back at the Dallas Sportatorium for this week's taping. We've covered a bunch of Texas Stadium footage over the last couple weeks. And now as we enter into the summer season, I think the next big event they have programmed is the Independence Day Star Wars. So we got a little over a month to see what kind of card they put together there. Now that we're dealing with all the fallout to the Texas Stadium feuds. And we open this week's card with a Mark Youngblood versus Assassin match. And this is interesting. The Assassin is originally introduced as Mr. Wrestling. But then he told Mark Lawrence right before the opening bell that he now wants to be referred to as the Assassin. For the record, I can neither confirm nor deny this is Jody Hamilton, who did work as the original Assassin. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Anytime I see generic unidentified mass job guy, I just kind of presume it's one of the regular prelim guys under a mask. Couldn't be Jack Victory. You know, at one point during the match, Bill Mercer was noting that the Assassin's gear looked like something resembling a karate outfit. It, most definitely did not resemble a karate outfit. He was wearing oversized baggy ring pants. Looked like women's loungewear. Something I'd expect to see out of a Lululemon. It was a fairly competitive match. Pretty back and forth. Every so often, Youngblood would get a flurry of offense going, but then get shut down by the Assassin as he would cut him off and slow things down. I mean, you pretty much figured they were going to go to a 10-limit draw. The one thing I didn't really mention about the Assassin is that he was essentially wearing a mask over a mask. He had the black hood on, but underneath the black hood was a blue face mask. Like, picture somebody going to rob a bank, but instead of wearing just the generic hood to cover everything but their eyes, nose, and mouth, they're also wearing another mask to cover up everything else. It was overkill. Also, I had to have been extremely uncomfortable wrestling like that. Much less breathe. So we get to the end where Youngblood tries to give the Assassin a backslide, but after he kicks out, the bell sounds, and it signals the time limit draw. Not a terribly exciting opener, but it was fine for what it was. It's always interesting when you see all these new names pop up, and sometimes you recognize them immediately, and other times you're sitting there like, who in the blue hell is this jabroni? That was my first thought when I saw the Assassin here. Who the fuck is that? So then we come back for a missing link grappler match. This is the week of the mysterious oddball gimmicks. You had two unidentified masked guys. And you've also got the missing link, who's just in a category all to himself. Nobody knows what his deal is. They were only wrestling for about a minute before I realized that the grappler's entire chest was caked in green makeup from Link's face paint. They did a few stalling tactics early on where the grappler was trying to avoid Link on the floor. It ended up with the grappler getting some brief heat on Link until he started fighting back. And the finish was kind of confusing at first because I don't think the camera actually caught what initially happened. You see the missing Link go for a crossbody dive, but he accidentally bumps Rick Hazard. And the bell sounds for a disqualification. I think at first everybody thought Link was the one getting DQ'd. But then we see Rick raising the Link's hand. So then I'm like, wait, what? How does that make sense? Well, come to find out, we were told that the grappler had shoved Rick Hazard in the way to avoid getting taken out. So the ref was disqualifying the grappler. Would have been nice if the camera actually caught that in real time, but whatever. There was nothing wrong with this, but you all know my thoughts on the missing link if you've been watching me long enough. Come to think of it, there still really hasn't been any kind of story payoff to Sunshine managing the missing link on television. She just sort of shows up in his corner now, and that's the extent to the reasoning behind it. Remember months ago, they inexplicably turned the missing link babyface and had him join up with Sunshine? Join up. Even though she was essentially kidnapped in broad daylight. Now she's just out there like nothing ever happened. I'm starting to think she might be a hostage victim. Like secretly she doesn't want to manage the missing link, but she's being forced against her will. That would actually be kind of intriguing, but I think that's giving World Class a little too much creative benefit. So then we had a great TV moment. We come back for John Tatum versus Steve Simpson. But right before they ring the bell, you see Tatum in the corner unwrapping a gift that a fan gave to him. And when he goes to open the package, it's a stuffed animal pig, which is obviously a direct shot of Missy Hyatt. That was actually really funny. I like that. Even Missy looked amused. There was a moment where Mercer talked about Missy's personality. He basically said, she's either very happy or very unhappy. To which I snidely remarked, isn't that most women in general? The wrestling here was actually really good. The great thing about Tatum is that he never really has to do a whole lot in order to get heat on himself. Just by association of having Missy in his corner, the people are prone to hate him already. But then he'll do something dastardly in the match or start jaw-jacking with all the people. And that really gets everybody's blood boiling. Tatum basically spent half the match toying with Simpson and trying to get under his skin. And then as Simpson started getting the better of him in the closing moments, you see Simpson try to go up top for a big move, but Missy reaches up and crotches him, which allowed for Tatum to give Simpson a suplex back into the ring and score the pinfall. They kept drawing attention to the woman in the crowd holding up the stuffed pig. Like at one point, Tatum went out to start mouthing off to her. It was actually a very hostile situation there for a minute. Oh yes, and we did hear from Mercer that they're going to be airing the mud match with Missy and Sunshine from Texas Stadium very soon. How soon, I'm not sure. They keep prolonging it. Hopefully we won't have to wait long, because I'm actually very intrigued to see that. For reasons that are apparent, yes. Anyway, TV main event. It's a tag team match, playa. It's Rick Rude and the One Man Gang versus Lance Von Erich and Bruiser Brody. Or as Mark Lawrence noted here, the sensational, exciting Lance Von Erich. For the record, yes, he actually said that with a straight face. Meanwhile, when they put the camera on Lance, he stood there with an expression that I can merely best describe as dim. Everybody in this match was a personality. The one fucking guy they try to sell as having a personality, it's the guy that showed the least amount of charisma. I mean, they had a pretty basic formula where the heels worked over Lance early on. Brody got a hot tag and went after Gang, which turned into a tug of war over a chair at one point. And that's when the heels turned the table and got to work over Brody for a bit. There was a false tag spot where Rick Hazard didn't see Lance get a blind tag, so he got sent back out to the apron. And eventually the heels tried to double team Brody illegally, which actually led to a cool finish where Hazard's trying to hold back Rude, but while his back is turned, he doesn't see as Lance comes into the ring and drop kicks the Gang, who was holding up Brody in a power slam position. So then Brody just falls on top of Gang and pins him to win the match. Can't really call it a slip on a banana peel finish, but kind of a situation where the babyfaces beat the heels at their own game of cheating. But of course the crowd popped for it. You know, I say this like every 3 weeks. I'm astonished that every time I see Lance and realize that people are still behind him as much as they are. I'd have figured the cat would have been long out of the bag by this point. But no. They are still cheering him like he's one of the Von Erichs. You know, right now he's essentially the default backup member of the Von Erich family since Kevin's injured and Mike still hasn't returned yet. And Kerry's going to be out of action pretty soon. So that really limits the field of active Von Erich members here in World Class from 86. And there definitely have been some big announcements for upcoming shows. Mercer was really pushing the Gary Hard message I will be hearing about in a couple weeks. We were also informed that Matt Bourne will be making his world-class debut very soon, which will definitely be a net benefit to the product. If you know anything about Matt Bourne as a worker, kind of talent he was. But that's what they offered this week. And it's still got a little over a month before the July 4th Star Wars. So we'll see how they start piecing together that card. We know for a fact that the Freebirds won't be a part of it. They dropped the 6-man belts to the Von Erichs, so they're out of action again. Which is definitely a hit on star power. But we've also got Bruiser Brody back in the fold. Chris Adams making his return at the Parade of Champions. So they got names. You know, the talent pool isn't so much the problem as it is just overall booking. Like right now, I'm not even sure who the 6-man champions technically are, given the situation with Kevin. Technically, I think it's still Kerry Lance and Steve Simpson. But again, with Kerry in the motorcycle accident, I don't know how that situation is going to affect the championships. It might just end up being Kevin, Lance, and Mike by the time we get to Star Wars. I think Mike will be back in the ring by that point. Which is not necessarily good news. But I think on that note, we will wrap it up there. Thanks everybody for checking out the show this week, and make sure you stop back on Monday for another Retro Raw report that we have in the bank. I also have preparations to do the Saturday night's main event recap, so we'll get those underway for Saturday. And I think, like I said, I think I'll have an extended weekend too, so I won't be in such a rush to prepare for next Friday's show. But we'll wrap it up there. Thanks everybody for watching, and take care. Peace out.